And I am delighted to introduce to you our panel of experts who are here to share some light on how they use the SDGs in their work and their experience working with young people, what their vision for young people is. So I will start with introducing Caroline Kleinfox. Caroline is the director of US SDG Policy Planning at the United Nations Foundation, where she manages American leadership on the SDG initiative and supports local, regional, and national mobilization on the global goals. Caroline actually has worked on the SDGs in the United States since 2016. First as the director of a startup nonprofit, and then as head of SDSN USA, which, if you remember, I mentioned. And prior to 2016, Caroline actually she managed projects centered around the Millennium Development Goals at Columbia University. So there's a huge breadth of experience that Caroline comes with. Caroline, hi. I don't know if you can maybe turn on your camera. Oh, there she is. And then after the introduction, I will stop sharing my screen so we can all see you. Next is April. April is the clinical assistant professor of business and society at NYU Stern. She has her undergraduate from NYU Stern School of Business and also her law degree from NYU School of Law. April does research that examines the impact of corporate activism and international law on human rights outcomes in different sectors. So she has been, of course, she's been working with a lot of young people in her career. And she also was a brilliant young person herself. I mean, she still is, but she was a recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship to China, and she has published papers on gender, economic development, and social change. And last but definitely not the least is Zahra Khan. Zahra is an adjunct professor of business and society at NYU Stern, but more especially to us, she is the program advisor here at the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. And she leads our Emerging Policy Leaders program, working with high school and undergraduate kids and teaching them the basics of policy making and then helping them create their own policy briefs. So welcome, all of you. It's so great to have you here. With that, I will stop sharing my screen so we can have a conversation. So happy International Youth Day to all of you as well. And we have some really great participants here that have been looking forward to hearing you talk. And maybe I thought we could start, even though I gave a very, very brief introduction, I thought we could start with giving you the opportunity to walk us through your professional journey. What inspired the path you're on? What has shaped your work along the way? Maybe we can start with Caroline.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me with you all today. I'm glad to be here for this conversation and glad that it's happening in the first place as well. So for me, I'm now, as you said, working at the United Nations Foundation, where I have the real joy of working on this program called American Leadership on the SDGs. But I've been working, as you said, on the SDGs in the US context since 2016. So I had been working on the Millennium Development Goals and was really interested in the idea of how do we kind of translate the lessons of applying this kind of framework in other places to the domestic environment in the United States. What does that look like? What can we learn? And I was involved in some efforts around SDG indices. How do we kind of do the assessments of progress from a data perspective on the SDGs, and then really started turning on the hearts and minds side of things. So how do people talk about this work at a local level? How do we connect the local efforts happening across the country to the global movement and build that infrastructure for conversation that the SDGs offer us in terms of a shared language and shared values?
Thank you, Caroline. That honestly sounds as the breadth of your work sounds as wide as the SDGs themselves. Thank you for sharing that. April, same question.
Great. Well, thank you so much for hosting us. And I was listening for the first part of the webinar, and Sakshi, you've done an amazing job. Thank you so much for helping to introduce the SDGs and setting up this panel so well. So my professional journey, I think, is not probably in the human rights space a very typical one. So hopefully I can offer sort of an alternate viewpoint of some of the varied turns and twists that your career can take. So I was a business major in undergrad, and I then went to law school, and I practiced as a corporate attorney for a number of years in the private sector, where I was focusing on something called project finance, which is helping clients borrow money or lend money to finance major infrastructure and energy projects. And that doesn't sound particularly exciting, but it was actually rife with a lot of human rights issues, because when you are building a large infrastructure project, for example, you might need to displace a community, or you might need to think about what are the environmental effects of this project, or you might need to think about when this project closes down, what are we going to do with the people who had jobs there and potentially aren't going to have jobs anymore, right? And what is the responsibility of the state or the government to oversee and regulate some of these projects? And what is the responsibility of the lenders or the borrowers and the companies to make sure that they design the project in a way that's respectful of human rights and the environment? And at the time, the SDGs, when I first started, weren't really a thing, but they've certainly been, the spirit of it was there. So after spending a couple of years doing that, I realized, maybe I'm more interested in the human rights stuff than I'm actually in the financing stuff. And I ended up moving over to NYU to start research and to help run this new Center on Business and Human Rights. And I've been there ever since, and it's been about 11 or 12 years now. So I just offer that to say that I think that we need a lot of different stakeholders in this space. I think governments have a very, very important role to play. I think civil society actors have an incredibly important role to play. And I think that companies also are critical partners in the SDGs if we are going to make it a success. So it's a little bit about me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, April. You're absolutely right. I think it has to be, as we have been insisting, it is all interconnected, and private sector and companies form a huge part of our economic and social fabric. So, having somebody also holding them accountable is super important. So thank you for that. Zahra, let's hear from you. Zahra you've worked at CARE as an impact at scale advisor. You build strategies. So tell us a little bit about the breadth of your work.
For sure, Sakshi, thank you so much for having me and all of us. And it is such a pleasure to be here and to work with you every day. So as a policy advisor at the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. So like you said, I worked my last role was at CARE, and I've been in the development space for 10 years. Maybe in some ways for the young people listening, my path has been more typical for a development professional. I think what inspired me, that was part of your question as a young person, was kind of what inspires all of us when we're young, to just do good, because our parents have taught us that the measure of a person is not the money that they accumulate or the fame that they achieve, but the good that they do with the inner time that they have on this earth. And I think when I was young, I was thinking, okay, what does good mean? What does good look like? And around me, especially as a woman, as a minority, a lot of times it felt like, it meant obedience. And what inspired me was being around a lot of women and minorities who spoke up and led and changed decisions. And it just it highlighted to me how many people in this world are not allowed to speak their mind because of their religion or the color of their skin or their gender or their disability or their age, young or old. And I think I was just so inspired as a young person to want to first selfishly fulfill my own personhood and potential, and help everyone else also just be a person who leads decisions. And so I think from a young age, I knew I wanted to study development. And the tough part, I think, when you go into college, and I studied international affairs and then development for my master's, is how do you stay in this field? I think that and so for me, I just have tried to hang on for dear life in an industry that's losing a lot of money, because I care so much about, it just gives me so much joy to be doing this work. And what I've learned, there's so many pathways to do good, and law is one of them, and medicine is another, and all those traditional fields. But when I took courses in development, I found it to be such an entrepreneurial space where people were just not calling for action or influencing folks with policy, but trying things, piloting solutions, trying to get funding for it, trying to use evidence to influence leaders to create change. And that's where I found my community. And I started my first role in Bangladesh, working in the field with farmers to raise and help raise their income. Starting, thinking about women. I was the first higher gender lead at an NGO called IDE in Bangladesh, recognizing that if we're not identifying what challenges women face, we're not going to be able to lift communities out of poverty. And what was unique about that organization was it took a market-led approach, understanding that we have to work through local systems to create sustainable change. That work led me to join CARE in the first role as an advisor to corporations to do human rights due diligence, and then NYU, where I met April, to think about the role of the private sector to not just make the business case, and constantly think of the business case to do the right thing, but go beyond and recognize that it's their moral responsibility to consider human rights. I rejoined CARE as their scaling advisor, particularly as our industry is changing, to assess whether the programs that we are developing can work not just in the perfect set of conditions that like the large amounts of aid allows us, but could be led and implemented successfully by governments and local markets. And so I've recently published that guidance and have joined you, and I continue teaching with April to sort of take all the ideas and shift our industry and the private sector as well to just around all these SDG goals really that have been a framework uniting us all together.
Thank you, Zahra. That's absolutely true. I think one of the more unsaid things about the SDGs is because the folks who sort of work with the framework are also end up forming a community across the world. So I have really close friends and allies at this point from around the world who we were all united because we all sort of worked within the same SDG framework. So thank you for sharing that. But you bring up a great point about how does SDG sort of appear in your work. And Caroline, you, I think, have had such a wide experience since 2016 itself, since the very beginning. And so tell us a little bit about your experience with working with the SDGs, but also 10 years on, what are some of the things that you have learned about it? And what are your observations about the collective progress that we have made?
Sure. So I have a really special, unique opportunity, which is to work on the goals as a whole. I think that many times the goals are a part of someone's work, or they are, you sort of align with a certain subset of the goals themselves and find your point of entry through that. So I think that I don't take for granted the rare opportunity that I've had to focus on national coalition building and community building really around the goals as a framework. And so, it's really been a lot of learning for me around how different people can engage with them in different kinds of ways across their work. In terms of where we are now, what we've learned, I think one of the more surprising things perhaps from the start to now is how useful they've become in the local engagement space. So in 2018, New York City launched the first voluntary local review, which is a local level city reporting of the SDGs, but they did it through the same kind of process that is the national way of reporting on the SDGs, which is the voluntary national review. And they launched it at the UN. Since then, there have been hundreds of voluntary local reviews done by cities across the world. And it really is exciting to me how connected individual people and communities feel to the idea that their local work matters in a global way. I think the statistic is something like 59% of the indicators have to be achieved through local implementation and at the local level. And but you can't always do that in a vacuum. You need the systems to be changing with you in order to make those changes locally that you need. And so it's really exciting to me to see the civic local engagement energy combined with a global connectivity and awareness. When I learned that the city of San Diego is doing a voluntary local review, and they are peer reviewing their VLR with the city of Yokohama, Japan, which is a sister city of theirs, who's also doing, I think, maybe their third VLR this year. And they're going to be, supporting each other and engaging around this process. It's really like seeing those things where you gave a beautiful overview of the SDG. It's seeing those things come to life. It's seeing the universality of the goals and the common language actually create opportunities for new partnerships and new ways of thinking. And that's what really inspires me.
Thank you. That's such a great answer, because I think voluntary local reviews are also super important, because and then the fact that SDG sort of builds into its framework that, there are multiple levels, local, regional, national, of accountability. And I think your work is essential because I don't know how many people in the audience are aware, but there are only like 3 countries that have never done a voluntary national review. A national review is something where the countries kind of go and self-report on the SDGs, that this is the progress we have made or this hasn't. And only 3 countries in the world hasn't. And 2 of them are conflict regions. I think Myanmar is one, and I'm blanking on the other. However, the third one is the United States of America, which is, a huge gap in our understanding. So the fact that cities like New York and San Diego are doing voluntary local reviews are filling in some of that gap. So thank you for emphasizing. And as I also mentioned in my presentation, that's why sort of engagement at every level with every demographic is so important. Which brings me to, the topic of today is youth engagement and how young people can engage in the SDGs. So all of you in some capacity or the other work with young people. So maybe April, you can sort of answer that as why are these youth voices important in your field? And what are some of the ways that you've seen youth influence policy practice or human rights work that you do? And how do you make sure that young people remain engaged in that work? Oh, you're on mute, April.
Sorry, you think after all this time Zoom teaching, I would know this. Sorry. So I think I can speak to it from a particular perspective, which is that I'm currently situated in business school. And so I teach a lot of business school students and also other students from around NYU. But I think for me, it's very exciting to see and be surrounded by people who are still embarking on a career and trying to find what they enjoy and what can be fulfilling for them and what they would like to do. And for everyone who's watching, right now or in the future, you have so many options, right? That it can be sort of overwhelming to choose. And you have a lot of different kinds of interests. And I think it can feel somewhat limiting to decide now and then kind of feel like you're pigeonholing yourself for some time. So what I've really seen young people do now is to broaden their horizons to a degree that I think was not perhaps possible when we were in college, which is that they think about the intersection of a lot of these different things, right? How could I be in business, but also be working for the SDGs? How could I work at a nonprofit or in the government or at the UN and bring some of my private sector knowledge to that environment so I can really create this cross-sector collaboration, right? And so I think it's about not just specialization, but it's about taking something that you are really good at and trying to export it to another field that could very much benefit from this expertise while being humble enough to know that a lot of people in that field have been there for a long time and that you don't have all the answers, right? But I think that there tends to be this siloing of effort, right? So if you are in business, then you don't think that you have any role to play in the public sector. And I just find that to be very, very tough, right? If we're all going to make progress, we have to do it together. And I think that this is the generation that gets that more than any previous generation. So I'm very excited to see that.
Thank you. You're absolutely right. I think one of the few drawbacks that we have learned of the few impediments have been this lack of multi-sectoral cooperation, and it's definitely something that's growing as we speak. And speaking of multi-sectoral, Zahra, you have worked across sectors. You have worked with business students. You have worked at CARE. You have worked in communities. So same question to you. How have you seen young people contribute to these different fields, and what are some of the ways that they have influenced policy, practice, but also, just your own work and your own goals?
Yeah, I mean, as Caroline was talking about, we won't see change unless we see change, unless we work through local systems. And so much of the global South is just being led by young people, right? And so they're not just recipients from their families of, they're not just beneficiaries, they're leaders within their own households. When you consider construction workers who migrate to the Middle East, they're young men, they're still youth, they might be earning for their families, but they are still young leaders figuring out, they may not be using the human rights language and lens, but they are fighting for their life and for their families, and they know what's best for them. And so I think that what inspires me is young people just speaking out for their own rights, right? Asking from companies and not accepting just treatment that I think we generations prior accepted. Just being more aware that they are allowed to unionize, they're allowed to demand higher wages. They shouldn't be working in heat without protection. And sharing their stories is probably the most influential thing young people can do, and sharing their needs and calling for action in that way. And I think that's what gives me the most hope, that their voices are not sidelined or restricted to what their parents' voices, but that they're leading and at the forefront of change.
Absolutely. And, so much of SDG 8 sort of talks about what you talk about. If we dive deeper into the targets and goals, it's just, we just don't say right to be employed. It says decent work. And the word decent does such, there's a lot of heavy lifting there, and what it entails. So it's really hopeful to see that young people are, and that's why we encourage people to engage with the SDGs, because then it gives you that common language. So
Absolutely. And that's not even just limited to the global South. Young people, the students we speak to, when we ask them what's a priority for them at work, it's their well-being. I don't think our generation was thinking about, work-life balance. And more young people realize that, your work doesn't love you back, and you have rights to, you can demand, a good, decent wage and living and working conditions. And there's nothing to be ashamed about. It doesn't mean that you're not a capable, talented, hardworking person. And I think that's pretty inspiring for all of us.
absolutely. Thank you, Zahra. Caroline, I want to ask you same, but I want to also kind of add something else, is that so you were working with the MDGs, and you sort of saw the context in which the SDGs were passed, and there was a whole generation of young people at the time who are now older in the workforce. How does that kind of contrast almost to today and young people today, and how have some of the priorities shifted? There are so many different kind of things that were not at play then and are at play now. What do you have to say to young people about that?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Hard. I think that, one of the things I like about the SDGs is they're sort of eternal feeling, right? Like if you reach no poverty, do you just cancel that goal, or do you create a more nuanced definition of what poverty means in that moment? I think the values that they represent and the universality of the agenda that they put forward is, to me, unchanged, but the context around them has shifted a lot. I think we've had a lot of disruption in the way that we, particularly, the U.S. Engagement in this work in the global space, and the negotiation that took place over the course of 3 years for the SDGs to come to pass would probably look very different if happened now. So I think that to me is something that has changed, but we also know a lot more about what it means to try and implement these goals in more places, and what it means to act and where there are pockets of enthusiasm, and where and one of these things, a place that I've seen the SDGs to be really interesting in engaging youth, is through intergenerational dialogue. So creating space for conversations across generations around shared values, especially when sometimes language changes between different generations. And so the way that, we talked about these issues 15 years ago is not the way that young people want to talk about these issues today. And so I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to use them as centering value propositions that can help us get through some of those language barriers that happen as time passes. And I'm excited for that opportunity. I think also youth bring a ton of energy, and a ton of dedicated focus. In some cases I've worked for a couple of years now with an incredible SDG advisory youth council that's based in Hawaii, and they have worked their way from learning about the SDGs for the first time to actually being invited into the room for policy conversations around sustainability, and helping to develop language for policy, being invited to actually write parts of the voluntary local review for their state. And I think that if we can find the right pipelines for engagement, there's a tremendous opportunity to capitalize on that energy and interest and bring it to bear on the changes that we need.
Yes, thank you for that response. I think that, I'm really looking forward to what the post-2030 agenda looks like, because as you said, a lot of young people have way more knowledge and awareness about the things that are happening, and they have been very vocal about wanting to contribute and creating spaces for themselves to meaningfully contribute to this agenda. So my hope truly is that we have something, an agenda that the older people might be like, I don't know about that. I feel like that might be a measure of success as well, because it really would be speaking to a different context. Thank you. April, you also brought up some of the things about, now that you're working with young people and you have been teaching for a while now. And, there are so many things that we sort of touched upon earlier in the presentation about the new things that are happening, the new challenges that are very unique to young people who are sort of just entering adulthood, or workforces, or, people from 12 to 30. And it might seem like there's this sense of hopelessness with the advent of AI, with the compounding climate crises, authoritarianism, so many things that even in the word cloud, some of the young people identified. So what do you, as an instructor, as a person who works with young people, how do you kind of deal with that? And what perspective would you offer young people who are struggling with this?
Thank you. Also a tough question. I think it depends on everyone's individual approach. Mine tends to, I think, veer on a little bit of the tough love side, which is it would be nice if you were entering a different world, in which some of the values that your forebears had said they had were manifesting today. And, I wish that we could have given that to you. But that doesn't exist, right? And so you basically have two options. You have one option, which is that you're just going to ignore it and kind of give up, or you have another option, which is that you're going to take this and make something good out of it, right? And I don't think anything is foreordained, and I don't think that bad things are inevitable. I think that we create problems and that we can create solutions. And so as there are enormous demographic trends, right? As the world shifts, as young people start to rise to positions of power, I am very hopeful that for this generation, they will take the challenge that has been foisted upon them, that they, to most degree had very little to do with, and that they will take it and make the world a better place. If we study history, we've seen that progress comes in fits and starts, and that it's never a linear line. And so I would say that there is hope because there's enough people who do want change. There's widespread dissatisfaction with how the world is going. I think it would be more of a problem if there's like a group of people, significant group of people who are like, this is totally cool. And then and there's like a small group of people who are like, no, actually, this is not very good, right? But we have widespread dissatisfaction. And I think if you get to the core of it, you'll find that the source of that dissatisfaction is actually that we have much more in common that we want the world to be than we would like to rip the world apart. And so I think it's about fostering dialogue across different groups. I think it's about being innovative. I think it's about taking chances. I think it's about, taking a chance on yourself, right? And to do something unexpected. And I'm very excited by what I see in the classroom. I think that young people can more than rise to that task.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Even though I don't teach a class, I often work with young people. And I do think, I think youth leadership is such a unique offering and so important. And, our founder, Ban Ki-moon, always likes to say that young youth are not the leaders of tomorrow. They are the leaders of today. And over time, I truly have started to sort of believe that. So speaking of leadership, and I'm aware that we have 10 minutes and I want to, give you time to speak to these questions. So speaking of leadership, what does ethical leadership in the 21st century look to you? Because we see so many leaders, and another thing that Ban Ki-moon said was, when somebody asks him, in all of your years being this world leader, what is your biggest lesson? And he says that it's that all leaders wake up with blinders on and they only look at nationalistic interests. They only look at short-term gains. They don't necessarily have that strategic thinking of planning 10, 12, 50 years ahead. So, there is a whole, you can be a leader, but then there's a whole different thing to be an ethical leader. So I want to ask all of you actually, what does ethical leadership look like to you? Zahra, maybe we can start with you.
Thank you, Sakshi. I want to answer this question. I just want to pick up a little bit on some of your questions about the post-2030 agenda, and April, what you were talking about, that tough love,
please.
and also what's inspiring about youth. And I think what the youth are teaching us, unlike any other generation, is how to hold leaders accountable. I think the way April was talking about that dissatisfaction and that demand for change, we see more young people talking, yelling, telling the Congress people wanting to vote at a younger age even, because they're dissatisfied with the world today. Our sector, even if it'd be nice to talk about all the successes of the SDGs, we're not on track to achieve them. Our sector is currently politically, financially, and morally weakened. Funding is being cut and arms sales are going up. So no wonder we're not on track. We have experienced a climate crisis. And so our post-2030 agenda must recognize that we cannot deliver on these promises if they remain aspirational without consequences for failures. And I think that's what young people are demanding. And if we're speaking about youth, like we can't talk about youth, we can't talk about youth and not to mention Palestine, because right now Palestinian children are being deliberately starved. Young journalists are being killed. Hospitals are being bombed where they're receiving treatment. And majority of the population of Palestine and of many countries that are experiencing war crimes is very young, over 50%. And when 60,000 people are dead, countless are disabled, and their traumas are forever if they even survive all of this. We have to ask ourselves, what have our SDGs really achieved? Climate change is an existential crisis affecting our youth, exacerbate these inequalities and these harms. They take away from all the progress we've made. And so what does it mean to influence those who hold the purse strings? What does enforcement mechanism look like? That's what needs to be considered the top priority post-2030. And I think it's the survivors of climate disasters and of war crimes, young people who are surviving this, that need to be leading the agenda, because they have to deal with all of this. They have to actually execute on these goals. And they're the victims of our failures. And so for me, ethical leadership, I'm inspired by the young to commit to not just doing harm, but to actively do good, and to have the courage to assess ourselves and check ourselves. So when we fail, we pivot and we keep moving forward. We don't, like April said, like just roll over, but get creative, get inventive, use that anger to fuel us, to make better decisions from a more informed place. So that's, I think, what ethical leadership means to me.
Thank you, Zahra. And thank you for bringing that up, because you are absolutely right. It is essential that, considering the context that we are living in, to be able to answer any question about ethical leadership. We have to acknowledge the failure of our current leaders and decision makers in having these atrocities, that letting them continue. So thank you. But same question to Caroline. What does ethical leadership look like to you in the 21st century?
I think that there are some things about ethical leadership that are timeless. I think if we, on the SDGs and how we move forward on post 2030 and how that ties into leadership going forward, I would say that we have to learn from what has come before. The MDGs and the difference between the MDGs to the SDGs and what progress we were able to make in those cases. And also, at this moment, we have 5 years remaining in the SDGs. We have to continue to push forward and also learn and appreciate what's worked and what hasn't. And I think that ties very strongly into my view of ethical leadership in this moment, is maintaining a global view, is understanding that change happens at the speed of trust, and that trust in institutions is not at a high point right now across the board. And so we need our leaders to recognize these realities and maybe not sugarcoat them, I think, in trying to address it and think about how we can provide transparency and honesty as we create a path forward, particularly in this changed environment and the increasing conflicts around the world and these challenges that we collectively face. I think that, part of the distrust comes from, as April saying, like there are a lot of people who don't like the status quo, or not to put words in your mouth, that's my paraphrase. But I think that respecting those perspectives in creating a vision for change and working to build trust is essential.
Great. So I'll go last. So for me, I think ethical leadership is actually internal. And what I mean by that is I think we live in a attention economy where everyone has an opinion on something and they're able to share it to, potentially millions of people, like right away. If you think about the videos that go viral, right? Like not all of them contain content that is educational or relevant or even desirable, like that I would love for people to know about. And I think that there's a lot of grandstanding, right? Because of social media and because you're trying to get likes and followers, and I think that in this time and age of trying to get outside attention, it actually, to me, ethical leadership means how can you guide yourself through a very turbulent time and through a very challenging world where you remain true to your values. It is not easy, right? Some of your values may end up conflicting, and you have to make a choice about what you want to do. And it's very, I think, trite to say, like, you have to lead by example. We know we've heard that many, many times, but I truly, like, what are we all doing in the times that no one is really watching? And if we say that we care about one thing or another, are we making choices that actively further that vision? Or are we just kind of waiting to, get the glory, right? And I think that that is a challenge that we've all had, and more so now people really are going to struggle with. So to me, ethical leadership is how much can you work on your own sense of place in this world, your own sense of belonging, and to slowly but surely create a space for others to join you and show through, example in your actions that that is possible.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, ladies. That was a great response. My next question was actually going to be, what is your call to action in global leaders? But I think this kind of covered it. And you know, anybody, any leader, if they ever watch it, would have that response. So since we're already at time almost, the last question that I would like to ask all of you is, what message do you want to share with the next generation of leaders? You have a few folks attending here. We'll be sharing this outside. What would you like to say to a young person watching this? We can go.
I can start because I get asked all the time. I do coffee chats with students all the time. And what I've noticed is that there is an overwhelming sense of anxiety and of pressure to have to figure yourself out. And so for whoever is watching, I would just hope to give you the gift of just relax. It's okay. I know you think 30 is like the end of the world, but I promise you, life goes on and you have a lot of time. And one of the things that I wish I could have told myself back in my 20s is, yes, things don't just work out magically, but not every decision is actually less important than you think. And what is really actually crucial is to spend the time exploring and thinking about what kind of person you want to be and what is the difference that you want to make in the world and how can you best make that difference and position yourself to be in a place where people will give you all those opportunities. But there's no need to make every single internship, every single line in your resume, like perfect, right? Some of the most, and I would wager for both Zahra and Caroline and Sakshi, like some of the most fascinating, interesting things that have happened to me and probably to you, has been completely unexpected, right? Like you couldn't have planned certain things that happened in your life or in your career. So take the pressure off yourself to make everything perfect. Just make the best choices that you can at the time that you get them.
Thank you.
Oh,
Maybe we can go alphabetically. Oh,
yeah.
Zahra.
Sorry,
please.
Sakshi, if it's okay to jump on that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I think similar to April, what April is saying, I think there's so much pressure in the attention era to, have achieved something glamorous, right? Otherwise, your life has, little value. And I think there's two parts to this that I would love to share with the youth. And it's kind of what I tell myself, is to never, ever give up on yourself. I know so many young people are feeling down about themselves and because I think mental illness is on the rise amongst young people because we're addicted to our phones. It's put the phone away. This is advice for all of us, not just young people. And to be present, appreciate what the resource, the health, the good health that we have, the time that we have, and to make the best of every single day. It sometimes feels like the world is ending when, a friend is upset with you or this project didn't go as well as you hoped. But the next day brings new opportunities. And only with time sometimes do you realize that the thing that you were stressing about wasn't actually that big of a deal, and in fact helped you get to that thing that you wouldn't have ever expected. And to believe that every moment that's written for you is the best place you could be in, and to take that sort of attitude and give yourself grace and give others grace, to not, punish people for a word that, that they said wrong, or a sentiment that they don't really believe in anymore. The right to change their mind, right? People should all have that. We should give ourselves that grace, give others that chance. So compassion to ourselves, to others, and just believing in ourselves to keep going. I think that's what I would tell young people.
Thank you. I think we could all use that advice, Zahra. Thank you. Caroline.
I love all of what both of you just said. This is fantastic advice for people of all ages, I would say. I will add, I guess, don't just put down your phones, turn off all the screens, step away from the devices in general. I think that, I grew up in a time where do what you love was this adage of, bringing your work with the idea of, making work something that you love in your life. But I have found, as April said, there's a lot of choices that you can make or things that sort of happen in your career that may turn out unexpectedly, no matter how you're trying to arrange that. And I think in the end, for me, it has been a really interesting journey because of those unexpected things. But outside of work, pick something to try that's new, that maybe you don't know how to do. Be an eternal learner. Seek something that may not be quite easy to learn, and spend some time trying something new, trying to find things that bring you joy. And my guess is that they'll also unexpectedly turn up in other areas of your life as well over time. And also, as Zahra said, be willing to change your mind if it doesn't bring you joy. So when I was a comparative literature major undergrad, and before I went to grad school, I took a design class, which was something that I had never done, and learned so much more about myself doing the hard, confusing work of trying to make a nest out of wire that I still can't tell you how many hours I cried over that project that meant nothing to my work, but found so much appreciation later for the effort of trying something new and different. And I think that process of being an eternal learner makes you a better leader. It brings you unexpected new insights in your work and in all areas of your life. It connects you to communities that you may not have been aware of. And so that is my suggestion.
Thank you. That was great, all of you. As Karen, you rightly said, I think that applies to all people of all ages, but especially to young people listening. And I would also end with just my little nugget of advice is that, a lot of us, I think, are here because we never stop listening to the voice in our heart, the voice that kind of makes you stop your car and give a water bottle to somebody you think is thirsty, or watch a news clipping and start crying. And time and time again, people will tell you to stop being sensitive to that. That's not how practical life works and real life works, and you kind of have to harden yourself. And my advice would be to disregard that advice and really lead from the heart, because the best leaders are the ones that are empathetic and that they can really imagine themselves in the position of somebody that they have never met. So with that, I call this panel to a close. Thank you so much, ladies, for being here and for making this panel such a great success. I hope that people here in the audience took a lot out of it, and then we will be sharing this with our broader network as well. And I will maybe follow up, since we are at time, I will follow up with an email and ways that you can continue to be involved with the Ban Ki-moon Foundation. We have 2 programs that are accepting applications right now, which we would love to share with you, and I hope you would apply. But thank you, everybody. And yes, please, I hope everybody stays in touch, and I will see you
Thank you,
at some point.
Sakshi. Thank you all.
Thank you.